Hello and welcome to the next clip in the Teardrop Ride series. This ride I'm on the road between Taralga and Goulburn. I'm heading south to Goulburn. I should have said in the last one that when I reached the new village and township of Taralga, my options were to go right, which is where I went. That takes me to Goulburn first. If I'd gone left, it would take me to Wombian Caves, which are limestone caves similar to Genolan Caves, but not quite spectacular. And then beyond there, you can go through to Mittagong, or you can go to Oberon. So the road between Taralga and Oberon is fully sealed, and is a good road for a motorcycle ride. So if you're thinking of going that way, be rest assured that it's fully sealed and it's a good ride. There's no services, no petrol between Taralga and Oberon. I'm not exactly sure what the distance is. I don't want to be quoted and say it's whatever number of kilometres is, because I don't know. But I figure if you're low on fuel and you've got some in Taralga, you would certainly get to Oberon from there. We left Goulburn with a full tank, and you get to Oberon, I think, on your tank of fuel, depending on your bike, of course, and the other variables, but I think you'd be safe going there. So in the last video I talked about motorcycling a bit. I specifically talked about the two bikes I own at the moment, and I spent most of the time, if I recall, talking about the Kawasaki Voyager, and I think I gave a pretty good account of it, a pretty good picture of it, but I don't want to suggest that there aren't any faults or any concerns or any problems with it. To the best of my knowledge, I've done some research to find this out. I don't think it's available. I don't think any of the big cruisers are available from Kawasaki in Australia any longer. I think the biggest one they have on their website is I think it's the partnership. The reason that is the bigger cruisers just didn't sell well, and they decided not to make them available in Australia. The one that I have, the Voyager, there's a Nomad, there's the Vaquero, which is I think what they call the Bagger, and then there is my Voyager. They're all essentially the same engine, which is the 1700 belt drive. The Vulcan is the sort of stripped down version. The Vaquero, as I said, is the Bagger version, and mine is the full touring version with the hard case at the top. I was just looking on bike sales today, and I see that the ones that are around the age of mine, with considerably less kilometres than mine, are going for, or people are asking for 11,000, maybe 9,000, 9,500 for them. So if they're getting those prices, they've certainly held their value, considering, as I say, mine's a 2010 model, so it's getting on for 10 or 11 years old. I bought it in 2011, so if the people who are selling them on bike sales are getting the prices they're asking for them, then they've held their value pretty well. There are two sort of main issues that I would say, if you were thinking of buying a second-hand one, that you need to consider. The first is, as I've said, this is a very heavy bike. It's 400 kilograms fully laden. Now, I'm not saying that to discourage you from owning it because it's heavy, because all big cruisers are heavy. I think, in fact, this one's heavier than the Goldwing. Not sure why that is, considering the Goldwing is a 6-cylinder. But I think, well, it is a heavy bike. And the one area where that becomes a problem is when you are trying to park this bike or crab walk it out of a parking spot or something like that. So the big issue with it is that it doesn't have a reverse gear. Now, I know that many bikes of that size don't have a reverse gear, but I'm aware that the Harley Davidsons, I think, and the Indian now have a reverse gear, and I know that for many years the Goldwing has had an electrically operated reverse gear. How that works is you have to have the engine running, of course. You then press a button on the left-hand side, I think, of the handlebar clusters, and the bike goes into reverse, but it can't go faster than 5 kilometres an hour. So if you were accidentally to grab the throttle, pull hard on the throttle and try to rev it, the bike wouldn't suddenly surge back on you. So it's only obviously for the purpose of reversing the bike in and out of a parking space or a driveway or something like that, and it can't go faster than 5 kilometres an hour. That compares with, say, the spiders, the Can-Am Spider, and I think the Can-Am Riker, that all have reverse gear, but it's a full reverse like it is in your car, and you can go whatever speed you want to go in reverse on those. But then the Rikers and the Spiders are much more stable because of the width between the two front wheels, and they're less likely to tip over or cause a problem. So that's the first problem that I would say you need to consider. If you're going to get a bike this big, in the city where I live, in Goulburn in New South Wales, we have nose-in angle parking, nose to the curb angle parking. So it's easy to roll this bike into a parking space on the camber of the road, but then trying to get it out of the parking space is going to be very difficult. So I would say it's almost impossible for you to crab walk or duck walk it out, and you probably need someone to help you push it out. Now you can always reverse park and put your backside in, but I suppose you risk the problem of being fined for incorrectly parked. So I guess it depends on how the parking is in your city or town. And I know trying to get my bike back into my yard and into the place where I keep it without a reverse gear means you've got to crab walk it in. It's not impossible, but it's difficult. So that's a consideration. The other consideration with the model that I have, and I think it was it continued to be the case till either about 2013, maybe later, is that there's a bit of heat that comes out of the right-hand side near the exhaust on the right-hand side, which is right near the rider's leg. So about 2013, but it may have been later, so you need to check this with the model you were buying. If you're buying a second-hand one, Kawasaki fitted an extra fan just behind the engine and underneath the seat. And the purpose of that fan was that it had a chute of some sort that sucked the air from the right-hand side and then forced it out on the left-hand side of the bike behind the rider. So it was supposed to deal with the heat problem. Now, I've never ridden one of those, so I can't say how successful that was as an option for dealing with the heat issue. But I do notice in my own riding in summertime, especially when you're stuck in traffic lights, that you can get some heat around your right leg. Once you get going again and you get the leg shields open, you get that flow of air in the air and it sort of blows it away from you, but it's when you're sitting at lights, and if you're sitting there for a long time, that heat can get uncomfortable, especially if you're wearing something like dry rider pants. So those are the two considerations I'd have about that bike. Now the other bike I have, as I said, is the Suzuki Bergman, which is a scooter. It's considerably lighter. It's a 220 kilogram bike, so it's much easier to manoeuvre, but it could still probably benefit from the reverse gear. Come back to that in a moment, but the other thing that I would look for and expect to find in that bike now, if it was still available in Australia, and as far as I can see it's not, you can get the 200 or the 400 but not the 650 any longer, there ought to be some option in a bike like that for music. Now exactly how they do that I'm not sure. Of course you could put music through your helmet, but in my Kawasaki, as I said, there is a radio and a possibility of connecting your music player through a earphone jack, or there certainly is a charger in the a charging port, cigarette charging port in the glove box on the Bergman, so you could plug one of those FM transmitters in if you had a radio, and then Bluetooth that way. So it would be possible to do that. The reason I'm saying that is we're in 2021 and people want music wherever they want to, or I do, when you want to take their music with them, then yes, you can get one of those headsets and put it inside your helmet and all that, but it's not quite the same as having it come out the speakers. Now I can assure you that with the Kawasaki, it has that thing where the volume goes up as the speed goes up to a certain extent, so that you can certainly hear the music while you're riding. And were I not to mute the sound from the cameras, you'd be able to hear this music coming through as background to these clips that I'm making. The reason I mute the sound that comes through this that's picked up by the camera microphone is I don't want to run into any issues of copyright with YouTube saying I can't upload the track because I'm playing copyrighted music. Obviously I'm not playing it for any commercial gain, but you don't know how the owner of the copyright is going to respond, and as a consequence whether YouTube are going to allow you to do that, so I just mute all the music and then put the audio on afterwards. So coming back to the reverse gear. As I say, it's not a heavy bike, 220 kilograms, but nevertheless, when you're trying to angle park and nose in, or getting it back out of a parking space can be tricky. And on that note, I was watching today on YouTube, or yesterday, I beg your pardon, an American motorcycle dealer in San Diego who was reviewing the 2021 Piaggio Mp3500. Now, Piaggio is an Italian manufacturer of scooters. They make Piaggio, Galera and Vespa. And the MP3 is a scooter with two wheels at the front. And it has a parallelogram tilting suspension system that means the bike rides and handles like a two-wheeler, but it has two wheels at the front, and those two wheels can be locked when the bike is stationary, so that when you get to a set of traffic lights or something, the bike is stable and you haven't got to put your feet down. But getting to the reverse gear, the 500 version of that bike has a reverse gear fitted to it. It's the biggest improvement in the bike over the previous models. They've done all sorts of tweaks to the colours and the aerodynamics and so on, but the biggest change is that previous models did not have a reverse gear, and they've now thought, well, reverse gear is a good idea, let's whack one on there. It's electrically operated as well, similar to the Goulburn model. You have to have the engine on, you select the reverse gear from the button on the handlebar cluster, and it backs up at slow speed. And the bloke said, doing the review, said you could back it up for about 100 feet, which I think is about 30 metres or so. Now, if you think about it, most people aren't going to have a driveway that's 100 feet or 30 metres long that you need to reverse out of. Even if you would think there'd be a way somewhere in that driveway if you needed to turn it around and drive it straight out. But if you're in a parking space somewhere that you had to put your nose to the curb, it certainly wouldn't be 30 metres long. He said you get a warning light on the dash cluster that informs you that you've reached the distance, and then you need to stop to let the electric engine cool down. So reverse gears on motorcycles, some people might think it's a bit of a silly idea, but as I say, trying to back up a big heavy bike, they're handy. But in the case of this Piaggio, you could back the bike up in reverse with the front steering engaged, meaning the front wheels were locked and the bike would stay upright, wouldn't tilt. So even if you were leaning it or getting the wobbles or something, the bike wouldn't tip over. It would simply go straight up, go whichever way you turn the handlebars, or you could have the steering unlocked if you wanted to. So it's a thing that can be done, and of course it wouldn't be necessary on every bike, only on the bigger bikes. And talking about the Bergman a bit more, I have owned and ridden for a little while a Piaggio Mp3400, and it's a bit difficult to compare those two because the MP3 is a two-wheel at the front, and obviously the Suzuki's one wheel at the front, but they're both scooters, and so they step through like that. The big difference between the two was, to me, aside from the extra contact patch and the extra traction and stability with the MP3, is that the MP3 seems to get its power band later. In other words, from about 80 to 100 onwards is where the real power with that bike comes, whereas the power band of the Suzuki seems to be available from the start all the way through, and it seems to be a much smoother band. Of the maxi scooters, and I'd consider that scooters over about 250 would be considered to be maxi scooters, but of the maxi scooters that I looked at, and I've sort of done research on that are available in Australia, I consider that the Bergman is probably the benchmark. I know that I think Yamaha now, the T-Max is now 550, but at one stage it was 500. There's a Kawasaki, I think it's a 300. There are the Piaggio 300, I think they start at 250, there's a 250, there's a 300, a 400, a 500. BMW do a 400, a 600 and a 650. The 600 or the 650, one of those is called a Sport, and the other one's called the GT. I'm not sure which one's which. And I think Aprilia, which is also an Italian makeup, they do an 850. But in terms of the specifications and the wind shielding and the weather protection and so on,
I considered that the Bergman was the best of all of those. As I say, the Aprilia would be bigger with an 850 motor. But I looked at that and thought it was more of a sports design. It looked more like a sports bike than it did like a scooter. In other words, it was designed in a lot more minimalist way, in a lot more, perhaps to be more aerodynamic and more sporty looking, whereas the Bergman seems to be designed with the idea of wind protection, where down around your legs you've got that almost like a fairing to keep the wind off you, and as I said, the electrically adjustable screen while you're on the move. As far as I know, the T-Max doesn't have that electrically adjustable screen. It has an adjustable screen, it's manual. The Kymco has an adjustable screen, but it has to be done manually. To me, that's a real detraction from it. And I'm not absolutely sure what the state of this play with the BMWs is. I think the 400 has a fixed screen, and maybe one of the bigger ones, the 600 or the 650, has an adjustable screen, but I'm not certain about that. And the Aprilia, as far as I know, doesn't have an adjustable screen. Another feature of the Bergman is it has electrically folding mirrors. And why that's handy, I guess, is that when you're parked, you can fold the mirrors in and avoid them being smashed off by a car getting too close to you. But also, if you are allowed to do lane splitting or lane filtering, whichever you call it in your jurisdiction, if it's legal to do it there, and you can fold the mirrors in while you're wiggling your way through the traffic to get to the front of the traffic lights and take off from there. So it's an advantage like that. I should have mentioned earlier that the Bergman also has a manual parking brake, so hand brakes for the front and back, front and rear brakes, but it also has a manual parking brake that you engage when you put the bike, or when you park the bike, and of course it has a centre and side stand. You put up with a centre stand and start the bike, you want to do maintenance or just run the rear wheel or whatever, but the bike won't start with the side stand down. I noticed talking about Piaggios, that they have now a system where the bike won't start, not only with the side stand down, but it won't start if you're not sitting on it. So you can't stand beside it and hold onto the brake and start the bike. You actually have to be sitting on it so that it can sense your weight before it will allow you to start the bike. All right, well, this clip is about to come to an end, so I'll say thank you for watching and listening. I hope I've given you some more information about bikes. I'll talk to you again when I'm making the next clip, which will be the last one in this series. I'll be back in Goulburn.